standards-based solutions, providing clear decision-making that aligns strategy, design, and implementation while observing cost constraints and controlling business risks. Along with our software solutions, we have professional services, training, and it's all based on best practices. BiZZdesign as a company has a very large global worldwide presence. We have hundreds of global customers across 6 continents and across all industries. We have direct presence in more than 10 countries and a worldwide partner network consisting of leading global consultancies, boutique consultancies, channel resellers, and partners. And now I will pass things over to Marc to continue.
Thank you, Brenda. So this is Marc indeed. Well, let me start with a slide that I will also show at the end of my presentation. And this is the message I want to convey, that strategy execution, that's a difficult business. Of course, most of you will know that in many companies, executing a business strategy is something that often fails. It's easier to define a strategy than to execute it. And what I'm going to talk about today is how you can link up a number of techniques to make this work, to really get from strategy to operations. The focus is slightly on enterprise architecture. Well, you will probably not be surprised given my background. I will talk about architecture as a sort of a hub in this landscape of techniques, where we use architecture models to link together different elements of what your organization does. So we start out with capability-based planning as a way of, at a high level, at a more abstract level, describe what the organization needs to do to make the strategy a reality. Then we step onto enterprise architecture, where you want to make this capability map, your capability plans, make them a reality, define the processes, the IT landscape, etc., to make this all happen. And then I will talk a bit about enterprise portfolio management as a way of supporting decision making on all these change initiatives, on the assets in your enterprise architecture landscape, because you always are constrained in terms of time and budget, so you have to focus on the most important parts of your transformation. You have to focus on business value. Throughout the talk I will show examples using Archimate models to link this all together, and I'll try to convince you of this idea of linking up these different elements through the use of models in order to make strategy execution a lot easier than it used to be. Well, first of all, the challenge that many organizations have to deal with, this digital enterprise that people are talking about, is really transforming businesses quite substantially. It's not just tweaking things a bit, it's really a major transformation for many companies. It changes their business model, it changes their way of operating, it changes their IT landscape. It has a high impact, and keeping all these changes coherent is quite difficult. And most organizations struggle with keeping this together. They don't have a systematic or reliable way of linking strategy to operations via things like enterprise architecture and portfolio management. And what makes things worse is that the speed of change is also accelerating. You see that, say, 20 years ago, companies could easily plan, say, 5 years ahead. But nowadays you have to react in the moment. It's very difficult to change course when you are not linked up, when you don't have this line of sight from strategy to operations, and the other way around, of course, because it's not just a top-down exercise, it's very much also creating a feedback loop. And what you see is that many organizations invest in many disciplines, that many aspects are tackled by semi-independent groups that have their own responsibilities, and that it's not linked up. So you have people looking at project portfolios, you have people looking at the fitness of the application landscape, you have people looking at the strategy, but it's very disconnected, and that's one thing we really need to improve. So this coherence is the focus of my talk, linking up these different disciplines to make sure that your strategy is really going to happen. I'm going to go through this story based on a client case. I can't mention the client, but it's a major pharmaceutical company, And we have abstracted from that a bit, and the storyline comes from their background, but it's sort of generalized into our Pharma client case, but it's based on a real client experience. So this large pharmaceutical organization is the result of a lot of mergers and takeovers, is spread over different locations, has an application landscape like you might recognize from these companies that have these backgrounds in mergers, that has a lot of duplication, a lot of unnecessary stuff, high costs. They lack a single way of operating, and that's what they want to do, what they want to create, to become this leading provider of healthcare services and pharmaceutical products worldwide. There are various drivers for change in this company. First of all, there are these external drivers in terms of the competition they have. Of course, it's a highly competitive world, pharma, and at the same time it's very strictly regulated. They have to conform to a lot of different rules, and they have to show that they are compliant, so they really need to be in control. On the other hand, the internal drivers are also very important. Well, like I said, they have this background in mergers and acquisitions, which resulted in a large legacy application landscape with lots of overlaps, with quite a number of heterogeneous processes and products and databases and all kinds of duplication across this landscape. So how do you do a transformation on this scale? On the one hand, all these external pressures, and on the other hand, the internal mess you need to clean up. And that's the situation they found themselves in. And already quite some time ago, they started working on a strategy. So this strategic planning process has been running for quite a while yet. So they recognize that the strategy is very important, but they struggle with getting from the strategic planning to the operations. So from planning to execution, and making sure that the execution really happens, and at the same time being able to adapt your plans and see what the impact is. That's what they were really dealing with. And another issue is that to make this work, you need to get information from a number of different disciplines, and all these disciplines had their own information silos. So connecting this, relating all this information was an important part of this transformation challenge. That's also, in many organizations, quite a difficult issue. Not just because it's hard to get at the information, but also because the stakeholders that own the information don't always see the need for sharing it, or even worse, they might feel that it's not in their interest because, well, owning the information gives them a position of power. And especially when you are looking at, for example, budget discussions, when you try to rationalize budget allocation, many people will complain that they lose their separate little budgets for nice things, and that they have to come up with all kinds of business cases, all kinds of validation of decisions. Whereas in the earlier days, they could just have this, well, let's call it decibel-driven portfolio management, where the people with the loud voices get their projects approved. So that's quite a challenge. So this transformation chain from strategy to operations really needs to deal with that as well. In my talk, I'm not really focusing on that, but it's as background to this transformation, it's quite important to realize that there might be a lot of resistance in the organization to get through this. But that's sort of a sideline. I'm now going to move into the more, well, let's call it formal or rational aspects of this transformation. This organization already was working on capability-based planning. So they had created a quite extensive business capability map. They had identified what they needed to be able to do to really make their vision, their strategy a reality. And in a pharmaceutical company, for example, capabilities around your product management are highly important. The product pipeline in the pharma business is really the lifeline to the future of these companies, so they invest a lot in those capabilities. Those were very high on the strategic agenda. So they had an extensive capability map linked to their strategic goals, and I'll show you some Archimate pictures later on how you can depict this. So that was in place. On the other hand, they already also had a large project and program portfolio, and large, it's really very large because they had more than 200 programs running, consisting in total of over 5,000 projects worldwide. So on the one hand you have your strategy, on the other hand you have a lot of people running around being very busy with lots of different projects, but there was a huge disconnect between the two. So they had projects that were not aligned with the strategy. Many deliverables, nobody could say why they had to be created. They had projects that were overlapping, creating similar deliverables, or even worse, projects that were contradicting. One project updating an information system, while the other project was aiming to replace that system. We really saw examples of that in reality, because it was so large that they could not really oversee the implications anymore. What was also a problem, that they had parts of their strategy not reflected in any program, so there was no way of getting that done because nobody cared about it. Nobody was responsible for making that part of the strategy happen. And at the same time, like I said at the beginning, they had this large application landscape that was overlapping, was way too costly, and they had to rationalize that at the same time as creating this new strategy and making that happen. And they couldn't really see the effects of the rationalization across the strategy implementation. So at the same time making the operational world function better and implementing your strategy, those were sometimes contradicting, and projects that were pulling in different directions on the same application, for example. So this gap, that needs to be bridged. That was an important focus in our engagement with this client, and well, this really requires a coordinated approach, and you might not be surprised that enterprise architecture is a very important part of that approach. So instead of just having your strategic planning and your project portfolios, you also need to have a design of the future. You need to be able to connect all these different elements together. So the results of all these projects need to fit together within this enterprise architecture. So basically the enterprise architecture provides you a way of putting together the pieces of the puzzle that are created by your project portfolio in such a way that you reach your strategic goals. So this coordinated approach, that's very important, linking these three parts of this triangle in such a way that you can really make sure that this all happens. So, and it's not just starting with a strategy, defining an architecture and then doing some projects. It also works in other directions. The enterprise architecture itself also provides the constraints for your strategy, for example, because not every strategic plan is feasible, and your architecture is also a way of checking whether this can really be done. Your portfolio management is also an important input to strategy and to architecture. For example, when you talk about what's feasible in terms of planning, in terms of budgets, you might design an architecture that cannot be built because it takes too much time. For example, and then the world has changed. So it's all interlinked. It's not just sort of a waterfall process, it's all interlinked. This coordinated approach in the middle, that's where we used Archimate models. So if you're familiar with Archimate, the Archimate language consists of a core and two main extensions, and the core is basically there to design your business and application and technology architecture. And the two extensions are the extensions for modeling the motivation of your architecture. That's what we see here on top, things like goals and requirements and stakeholders and drivers and that type of concepts. And the second extension is the implementation and migration extension. And that's what we see on the right. I've just listed one concept, just shown that you can have a project that realizes some elements in the core, which realizes a requirement that contributes to a goal. But that's also where you do the planning, the architecture plateaus, for example. So these three parts of strategy execution are nicely reflected in the structure of the Archimate language. Now to zoom in on this a little bit more, here I've put a picture that links together a number of elements in this overall model that we created. And this is just a snapshot of a small part of this entire architecture model. On top, we see a number of business goals. In this case, concrete requirements, but this picture extends way up until the upper level strategic parts of well, the strategic goals of the business strategy. What we see in the middle layer, we see the capabilities. And capabilities are a concept that, well, it's not yet in Archimate, but it's a highly useful concept that we aim to put in the Archimate language. And the capability, as well, some of you will know, is the ability that an organization has to do something. So it's not just something like a business process, it's not something like a business function, it's slightly more abstract. It describes what you are able to do, what you can do, and maybe what you want to do. And especially capability-based planning is a very useful technique to define how you want to realize your strategy. What capabilities are needed, what improvements in existing capabilities are needed to make your strategy a reality. So what we see here in this small part of the picture is two capabilities and two increments of the capability, the target capabilities. So that's the second layer. Then in the third layer, I've just listed architecture plateaus, and the picture here shows the plateau concept from Archimate. But this a plateau in Archimate's terms is a collection of architecture elements that are in existence in a certain time frame. So it's a stable situation, stable state of your architecture that exists during a certain time frame, and a certain architecture plateau realizes then one or more capabilities or capability increments at a certain moment in time. This is also taken from the TOGAF way of dealing with capability-based planning, where you also have plateaus creating certain capability increments. And then finally at the bottom, we see the change programs. So all the work that needs to be done, programs, projects, work packages, to create these architecture plateaus. So that's where, for example, your project portfolio management lives. So these are the four main aspects that you need to link together. You have your goals, your strategy, where you want to go as a company. You have the capabilities that you need to create this strategy, to make this strategy really happen. Then you have the architecture plateaus, the stages in your architecture that implement these capabilities. And finally, you have the change programs that realize these architecture plateaus. So this is linking everything together. Now I'll zoom in on more details of these different elements. So first of all, probably quite unreadable if you have a small screen, a part of the business strategy modeled in Archimate with some added details. And here we see this idea of becoming the leading provider of healthcare services in the world, the top level strategy, the highest level goal. And then they have defined two different sub-strategies, the product leadership and the operational excellence strategy. And they want to see what the impact of the different elements below that is on these two strategies. So product leadership, for example, one element contributing to that is the centralization of their information systems, and I'll zoom in on that a bit. So centralizing the information system is one goal that they have. It's also related to cost savings, for example. So this is a goal that has multiple reasons of being. And this goal has a number of sub-goals that contribute to this higher goal. So there's a goal of improving the information sharing, resource sharing, and eliminating local variance, and I've also put some weights on that. So just for the example, you can see how the different sub-goals contribute to the upper level goal, and together they realize that higher level goal. Then below that we see a number of more detailed requirements. Requirements to certain capabilities in this case, or maybe to certain information systems or anything else you want to realize. So these requirements are necessary to realize these goals. And then we see the different capabilities that realize these requirements. So these capabilities need to make sure that, for example, the business processes are harmonized. That's very important for the customer management capability. It needs to have harmonized processes, for example, for billing, and I'll show an example of that later on. The company had a number of different processes, especially in different regions, for billing customers, and they recognized that that was not very efficient, rather costly to have all these different processes and especially the different systems supporting them. So one of the things they wanted to do was facilitate the sharing of resources across the different country organizations, but for that to work they needed to harmonize these processes and harmonize the information systems supporting those. So looking at capability-based planning in a bit more detail. Business capabilities, like I said, are the things that you want to do or you can do as an organization. Now, given your resources, given your processes, your people, your systems, what can you do, what do you want to do, what do you need to do to make your strategy really happen. And an important aspect of capability-based planning is also that you have different axes, you could say, different dimensions across which you want to evaluate capabilities. You have different levels across these dimensions that you need to assess, and that determines what you need to do with these capabilities. And indirectly, that's also something you want to use in your portfolio management. Because a project that realizes a certain, say, application that contributes to an increase in a certain capability level, that project has a certain value based on this capability level increase. So by linking this together, you can compute, analyze why this project needs to be there, what the importance is, what the value of that is, based on this increase in capabilities. So it's very important as input for your investment decisions to know where the contributions are of these projects and programs, and also of the different assets in your architecture. So, for example, a business process or an application contributes to a certain capability and it has a certain importance for that capability, and that's also something you want to put in your portfolio management. So just an example of a capability map. This is part of the capability map of our example organization. If we zoom in on that, here I have this customer management capability. Well, it's really a typical capability map, so customer management is decomposed in a number of sub-capabilities. In reality, they had a third level of capabilities as well. I didn't show that over here, but our client also went in a little deeper. But I think in most organizations, that's about how deep you want to go. More than 3 levels becomes rather unmanageable, and then you really end up at the level of business process modeling, etc. And that's not the same as capability modeling. And I think then you're starting to confuse things. So 2 or 3 levels, that's useful. That's also something the business recognizes. And here we see some examples of capabilities and sub-capabilities for customer management. Like I said, capabilities have different dimensions across which you want to value them, to assess them. And here I've listed 6 dimensions that we've used in this case. A product dimension, a people dimension, information, process, an external dimension, and the technology dimension. And I've also plotted for one specific capability, the product management capability, the baseline and target for each of these dimensions. And you see that in this product management capability, especially the product dimension needs to be improved. So that's something you want to focus on. Typically when you see a spider diagram like this, you want to focus on the dimensions where the necessary improvement is the biggest. So if a project contributes to this product dimension, it's probably a very valuable project, whereas a project contributing to, say, the people dimension doesn't really add anything because it's not something you really want to improve on. It's already good enough. So linking these metrics to your model, and here I've depicted an example metric for the process dimension, that helps you to analyze these capabilities and to decide on where the improvements have to be made and where you want to target your projects or your assets related to these capabilities. what we can do in our software BiZZdesign Architect is really map out these different metrics. This is not something that's part of Archimate, but you can pretty easily map this onto Archimate concepts like, say, the driver concept. A metric is basically a quantitative driver that you can really attach some value to. And typically these metrics are composite, and in this case, for example, a metric for this process dimension consists of things like process adaptability, so how easy is it to change the process, and it's weighted with a factor of 2, so that's fairly important. The process maturity, so how stable is it, how long has it been in the same state, how mature is the process. The performance, well, you can imagine why that is important, and also the process variance. And that's something that was important in this story about this customer management capability. Like I said, they had, for example, this billing process where they had different variants which they wanted to get rid of. They wanted to have just one single process and one single application supporting the billing process. So their process variance was one important aspect of evaluating this capability. So looking back at this capability map, you can do this evaluation for all your capabilities or for all your important capabilities or strategic capabilities, and then you get these nice spider webs. And of course, based on these spider webs, you can then make decisions where to invest. This is still a very high level. It's not a detailed planning of your investments, but it's certainly very important that you can see in pictures like this where the big improvements are needed and where just the small tweaks are. So the big steps, that's where you want to really focus your energy. So that's the capability-based planning part of the story. Then, of course, we get to the architecture, the third level of the picture. And here I've just listed a small piece of the architecture and colored it in yellow and orange to show you the baseline and target architecture in the same frame. What we see here in the baseline in orange is that we have a number of different billing processes and services and applications. And in the target, it all needs to be one. And the target model is a little more detailed because there you also see some of the functionality of the financial solution. So you see this billing function as part of the financial administration, and you see a bit more detail in the application services that support the business process for customer billing. So you see a create invoice and the send invoice service that supports this. But this is the high-level design of this new billing solution where you have a single billing process, a single application supporting that. And pictures like this with these colorful images that show in one overview how things are going to change from baseline to target, that's something we also create quite often. Currently I'm engaged with another client in the Dutch healthcare system, a government organization that is going to divest part of its tasks to another government organization, and with that large parts of their application landscape need to be moved from one organization to the other, and they use these kinds of colorful pictures quite extensively to clearly show which parts are going where, what the different plateaus in the architecture are. And of course this example is very small. If your organization is as simple as this, you don't need any of these pictures, but you can imagine how big this becomes in these large administrative organizations or in a pharmaceutical company that operates worldwide. Typically we create different views of different aspects, different elements, different parts of the architecture, and then show these kinds of pictures. The single overview where it's all in one picture, I think that's not really what you want to do. It becomes way too complicated. Nobody can understand that anymore. But sometimes I do create application landscapes, and I'll show pictures later on, where we show the overview of the entire application landscape and use colors to put in information on, say, the health of the application to support portfolio management. So that was the architecture part, just one architecture picture, still pretty simple course, but we'll see a few more later on. Well then, of course, you need to define the different programs and projects that are going to realize the elements in your architecture, which in turn realize the capabilities, which in turn realize your strategic goals. So you can model these projects as well in Archimate at different levels of detail. You can have a complete program consisting of a number of different projects which have their own work packages, etc. As detailed as you want to have it, and link that to the elements in the architecture that are realized by these programs and projects. So in that way you can see what say a project contributes to the architecture, to your application landscape, for example. You can see how that application supports a business process, how that process is important for a capability, and how that capability realizes your goals. So in that way you can, by walking through the model, you can already see the value of a project to the business strategy. If you then look at the relationships and maybe even put some weights on that, you can make this even more fine-grained. What I showed in this picture of the business strategy, there I already used some of these weights to show you how the different sub-goals contribute to the higher level goal. And you can do the same across the entire picture, the entire model. You can put weights on that and then do the calculations to show how important, say, a project is for realizing your strategy. So linking this all up really helps you to create this integrated picture. And here I've shown a simple program with a simple set of projects for harmonizing these billing processes. Of course, this is a very simple picture. In practice, you have multiple relations projects having a different, are often working at different parts of the architecture that might be related. So a project needs to be finished before another project can start because the output of the first is needed by the second. Projects might be working on the same application. You want to be sure that they are not in each other's way. So again, linking this information together is very useful for project planning purposes so that you're sure that the projects create the right results in the right order. So that's the project part. Now let's move on to portfolio management. And we call it enterprise portfolio management because it's not just about project portfolios or application portfolios. It's about everything you want to invest in as a company. Portfolio management is a way of managing these investments by grouping the things you want to invest in based on some criteria and managing this as a set. Managing that, so for example, allocating budget at the portfolio level, so different portfolios are allocated a budget, and within the portfolio you then distribute the budget across the different elements in the portfolio according to their business value. The idea is that you then avoid the problem of having, say, these 5,000 projects that this organization had, and you need to decide on all these 5,000 projects individually. You don't want to do that. You want to decide on your investments at a higher level. So, for example, allocate a certain budget for innovative stuff, allocating a certain part of the budget for maintenance, allocating a certain part of the budget for functional improvement, in order to make sure that, for example, the maintenance of your application landscape doesn't take up all the budget. So managing large groups of things by way of these portfolios. Well then, portfolio managers are of course dealing with a lot of different questions, especially what's in their portfolio, what are their responsibilities, and how are these things related, and then how do you evaluate them? What are the suitable metrics to decide on the value of the different elements in your portfolio? And finally, of course, you can decide on that and allocate your budgets accordingly. So this requires good insights into the coherence of the portfolio, the linkage between portfolios and other parts of the architecture. And you want to have the dashboards that show you the information that you need to decide on. We've already touched on the relationship between architecture and portfolio management, and well, this sort of summarizes that. On the one hand, you have the enterprise architecture showing you the current and future state and linking everything together, and on the other hand, you have the portfolio management part that puts the numbers to that, you could say. It helps you decide on different scenarios. It helps you allocate your budgets in those places where they add the most value. So those are two disciplines that should be linked pretty closely. In practice, we see that especially program and project portfolio management is not always that related to enterprise architecture. Application portfolio management often is, but project portfolio management is in many organizations pretty standalone. But it could benefit a lot from linking it to the architecture and then integrating that in this larger picture with all these different relationships. And that really allows you to well, make informed decisions and see the impact of changes in your portfolio management. So to put this in one picture, you have your program and project portfolio management. That's where the change happens, and then you have your assets, for example, your applications. That's where this change operates on. So it's sort of a cycle. A project improves something in the asset portfolio, and on the other hand, your asset portfolio requires the projects to make these improvements. So these are tightly related portfolios. So we really think you need to manage those as well, in an integrated way. We see, well, you could say the three most common use cases for this enterprise portfolio management. First of all, application portfolios. That's something that most organizations with these large application landscapes nowadays need to do. Our pharmaceutical client with their legacy landscape resulting from all these mergers really needed to weed out the old stuff, make sure that they have a coherent set of applications that support their business without too much overlap, reduce costs, etc. That's where application portfolio management comes in. The second one, which we also applied at this client, is this long-range capability planning. So long-term investment decisions or medium-term investment decisions, which programs do I need to do to make sure that my strategy really happens? And that's also, well, it's investment decisions, but it's not just based on only on the numbers, only on the financial stuff, but also on your architecture, on the relationships that you find in there, maybe the risks you see in changing things, and that's the second use case. And the third use case we see is well, you could say sort of the result of the first two. It's the benefits optimization one. When you have these projects running that deliver their results, you want to track these results and make sure that they contribute to the architecture and to the business strategy. Maybe you want to reallocate budgets. If a new project comes up that can provide even more value with the same budget, maybe you need to stop an existing project to reallocate that budget. So this is the continuously well, the continuous optimization process of your portfolio, tracking the benefits back to the architecture and to the business strategy, seeing where they create their value. Well, then a few pictures about the portfolios here. This is just what you could typically find in portfolio management. The portfolio typically has something like a description, an owner, a set of goals, of course a population, the elements in the portfolio, the stuff that you want to manage, and then a set of metrics, the KPIs, the ways you decide on the portfolio, things like the cost or the strategic value or the risks or the benefits. And then finally, you want to have the dashboards that show you the right pictures. Nice, colorful graphs that give you the overview that you need to make the right decisions. These are just some pictures from our own portfolio management solution. But you can imagine that this is the kind of information that you always need to have for portfolio management purposes. And this population, the things that are in there, that's of course stuff that's also living in your architecture, in your Archimate models. You have the applications, you have maybe the business processes, you have the projects, etc. So that's an easy way of using the information that you might already have in the model, in the architecture model, in the Archimate model, and putting that in the portfolio management context, adding all these metrics and data to it. And that's what this picture shows you. You have this enterprise repository in the center. That's where you link the data together based on, say, this model-based vision using these architecture models to integrate the data and making sure that it's coherent, you create sort of a hub, a knowledge management hub, where data is linked and put into the architecture model, and then you can make all these kinds of analyses. So I've just listed some examples of where the data might come from. Of course, architecture's at the bottom right, that's an important input. But you might have asset inventories in your, say, your CMDB. You might have contract information that tells you things about licenses and costs of applications. You might have your project planning that tells you about the resources and the projects. And there might be also other things like checklists that tell you something about the health of your architecture, of your application landscape, the quality and the usability of applications, etc. By linking this data and relating it via these models, you can create these overviews. And then when you have that, you can create portfolio dashboards. And these are just some pictures of that. And this last one you might recognize. This is the typical type of analysis that you do in application portfolio management, application lifecycle management. Gartner calls it time analysis. That's the tolerate, invest, migrate, and eliminate quadrants you see here. And if you plot your applications in here, and here I've used the size of the bubble for the cost of the application and the color of the bubble for the risk associated with the application. And if you plot that in a picture like this, you can see what you want to do with these applications. So for example, number 7 at the top left, it's something that has a fairly low business value, but technically it's sound, so you can tolerate that. You don't need to immediately do something about it. Maybe you want to improve it functionally so that you can do a bit more with that, so that the business might use it a bit more. But it's technically good enough. You don't need to eliminate it or to migrate it to a different platform. These colors you can also use for coloring your application landscape. And that's this picture. Here I've used the same colors. And here we see, for example, at the top right, or the top left, a number of applications that are red that we really need to eliminate. Or at the lower left, it's even worse. We have a function that's supported by a number of applications, and only one of the applications is in the green quadrant. It's good enough. Most of the others are problematic. And an overview like this, without showing any relationships between all these applications, but an overview of like this is really helpful for IT management to see where the problems are concentrated, where they really need to focus their attention. And insights like this are the things that you need as a CIO or an IT manager to make decisions on where to move with your IT landscape. Moreover, these kinds of pictures you can also use for planning transitions. And this here I've used a different kind of coloring. The colors over here are used to denote which of the original organizations involved in the merger were the owners of these different applications. And then you can show that this landscape is gradually transformed to something with a lot less applications, and you still see the origins of the applications, but a lot of data from many of these old ones is migrated to this smaller number of new applications. So that also shows you in one overview how this application landscape evolves and how it improves. And of course, based on this, you can then do your cost calculations and show how the costs go down as well. How these things are linked together. And now something that's, well, you could say putting it all on one page. This is something we are working on right now. It's sort of speculative. This is a picture from a mock-up we've just created to show your strategy, your capabilities, certain assessments, part of the portfolio dashboard, just in one page. So here on the top left we see the vision, on the right the mission of this company, its strategy outlined, an assessment of the current situation, so what are the things that need to be improved. In the center we see a capability map, just a small part of the overall capability map. On the right we see a number of objectives to address the assessment of the situation, so what do we need to do? Well, for example, improve the product offering. Then a number of initiatives to realize these objectives, so your projects and programs, for example. And finally, the business outcomes you want to realize with that. And then the idea is that because there's a model behind this, you can link this all together. And here we see at the bottom a number of the different programs involved in all these changes with their budgets, with their strategic value, etc. And if I just click on the application rationalization program, it shows me what are the aspects of my overall picture that are involved with this application rationalization. And I see that, for example, it's closely related to operational excellence. It's related to this elimination of local variance. It's related to consolidation of applications. It's related to the assessment that it's very difficult to comply with rules and regulations due to this complexity of the IT landscape. And it's also related to this asset management capability. Of course, this is just a simple mock-up, but given that we have these models, this is really something we can support. This is really something we want to build, and by having models, allow this one-page overview of your strategy, of its implications, of the costs and value of the capabilities. And this is the, you could say, the final goal of linking up all these models to be able to provide this overall picture of strategy and its implications to management that is concerned with strategy implementation. So this is just the single picture outcome of this entire story before. Of course, all these elements are still necessary, but this is the idea, making sure that all these elements work in coherence towards the same goal. So summarizing, basically the same things I said at the beginning. This is my my final slide, which mirrors the slide on the take-home message. The idea is indeed to make this strategy execution a lot more easy by having models that link up your capability-based planning, your enterprise architecture, your enterprise portfolio management, and then relating these in such a way that you can make all these analyses on impact of change, on costs, on value, and in such a way that you really are in control of your strategy. So that's my final slide, and now I'm happy to take your questions.
Are there any questions?
Silence. No questions.
I don't see any in the chat. Julie, are there any questions in your chat window?
Hello. Yes, we did have one question. I guess, you know, it's just my screen that I'm getting all the questions. The question is, what tool are you using for managing models, etc.?
Yeah.
The tool I've been using here is the tool that BiZZdesign provides, BiZZdesign Architect it's called. So that's what I've used to create all these pictures in the demo. And if you want to know more about the tool, well, you can visit our website. There's a lot of information on there.
Or send one of us an email. We'll be happy to.
Or send one of us an email, or give us a call, or.
Yeah.
Sure.
Any other questions, Julie?
Not that I can see at this point. We had a lot of comments, but a very pertinent presentation. Oh, we do have another question here, and a lot of comments on a great presentation, so thank you so much, Marc. There is another question. Is the spider diagram, in the spider diagram, how is the technology measured?
Aha. Yeah, that's, well, there are, of course, a lot of different possible metrics for that. What you see in many cases, well, things like, say, the number of outages might be just one metric you want to put in there. But what we did in there, it's fairly high level. So it's mostly based on an assessment of the technical quality of applications by the experts involved. You can go deeper than that. We have clients that do actual measurements of uptime, do surveys among users, and you can make that pretty detailed. There are some good practices out there. One standard that you might use for that is the ISO, I think it's the 25010. That's the standard for software quality. It has a lot of different aspects of quality, things like adaptability, user-friendliness. It's a complete list of quality attributes of software, and you can attach metrics to that. That's I think the most extensive standard that I know of, and that's a useful basis for that. But in this example, we just used an expert assessment.
Great. And another question is, how long did it take to get to this level of detail and maturity?
Well, given that we were not involved in the earlier stages at this client where they built this capability map, it's not easy to answer this overall. But I think in total, perhaps 3 years, something like that. I think we were involved for about 1 year. I think but before that they had already started with capability mapping. But it depends on the organization. If you really start from scratch, it's probably taking you about 2 to 3 years. Not just because it's a lot of work for a large organization like this. It is a lot of work, but maybe also because it takes some convincing that people need to share the information. You need to gain, say, the reputation that you are trustworthy with the information, that you do useful stuff with it, that management really can rely on that, and that also takes some time. It's a matter of convincing the people by showing them the results and taking them through the process. But a first step in this, in a few months' time, you can already set up pretty nice projects, certainly when it's on a smaller scale than this example organization. So we're running a number of different smaller scale pilots with this, for example. In just a few months' time, you can get to substantial results.
Do we have time? We have time for a couple more questions. We have actually quite a few coming in. How much more receptive is the business once you approach them with these quality artifacts? Are they starting to ask for them on other projects due to the value add?
Yeah, I think it's easier to show the value of what you're doing also as architects by showing them these these business value numbers and pictures than it is to show them the complicated architecture diagrams. So in my experience, it really helps to convince people that you're doing valuable work because it shows them how it contributes to the bottom line, what the business gains from having this integrated picture. So in many cases, I just don't show the complicated architecture pictures. I show them the outcomes, the dashboard graphs, the decision based on that, maybe some of the the issues that when you want to change something that there's a lot of stuff related to that, then you can show, well, we have this complicated diagram, this complicated model that shows you that if you want to tweak this, you have to take into account that this is attached to that and that. But in my experience, it does help you a lot when you can talk in terms of things the business finds important, and especially when you can talk in terms of money, that really helps to convince people.
Thank you, Marc. Another question. In the technology web map on page 22, the target to be score seems has a lower score than as is the baseline score. In this case, what kind of measure to address this, or does it mean no action is required?
Slide 22. I think there are some examples in there where you recognize that some capabilities might be better than needed. But I'm not sure what what was the exact question, because I didn't draw up all these diagrams. A colleague of mine knows the details about the different measures, so well, perhaps, I'm not sure I can answer the.
Yeah, perhaps we can answer that via email. Just because there's a couple more simple questions. Well, a question: many executives and senior management, when presented with this type of approach, do not express interest in it. Do you have any idea why and possibly how you can change that?
Well, you do see that management find it sometimes overwhelming that you link together this information. They have this picture in their head that it's becoming really complicated, and they'd like to be the world, well, they'd like the world to be simple and make simple decisions and have simple outcomes. But when you show them the effects of a decision on different parts of the enterprise, not even showing them the details of these pictures, but showing them that lots of stuff is linked together, and that when they decide on one part that it influences some other part, they might get interested. But perhaps you should be careful with showing them too much complication, because well, it depends on the kind of management you have, but they might find that overwhelming. And I think it's a good strategy to hide a lot of the complexity and be aware of that as architects and as portfolio managers, but only showing the outcomes to the upper level management. And by showing them how this really adds value without showing them the technology under the hood, I think it's easier to convince them that this really is important and necessary. And so focus on what their problems are, their issues. So things like a budget allocation, how do I really make sure that my money is spent wisely, risks, how do I make sure that a project doesn't run into another project because they are working on the same part of my IT landscape. So talking in those terms, money, risk, compliance, those are the things that are really the concerns of these upper level managers. And this is just your toolbox that helps them be in control.
Wonderful, and time for one last question. If I have any more questions coming in, I'll email them to Marc and Brenda, and hopefully they can respond to you. And again, they did put their contact information on that last slide. So the final question is, what is your recommendation for the planning, EA, and project portfolio management teams to work together? So you kind of just went there, but.
So how to make the teams work together? Well, it's of course very useful if they are, say, in close connection in terms of the organizational structure. What's helpful is if you have something like a CIO office. That's where you often find both architects and portfolio managers. So then they are closely related. They already know each other. Often they have to work together. Maybe they're even located in the same office. So I think that's always a good basis. But I also see organizations where say the project portfolio management is more closely related to say the CIO, and architecture is delegated to the technical part of the organization. And I think that's something that doesn't really work out. You really need your architecture group, your architects be connected to the business side of the organization as well. So if you only do architecture at a technical level, I think this is very difficult. Then it's just seen as high-level design, and it's just more than that. It's also about decision making. But there are two sides of the same coin. I think both the portfolio managers and the architects have the same goals, but they approach the world from a different direction. So if you show them how they can reinforce each other's work, portfolio managers can benefit from knowing all these dependencies in the architecture, and architects can benefit from knowing about the budgets and the importance of different projects. I think it's just helpful to show them how this works together, sitting together, making sure that each group benefits from the work of the other group. I think that's important. But it starts with knowing each other, knowing about each other's work, just sitting together and showing each other that you're really working in the same direction.
Yeah,
but
I think Marc. Sorry, yeah? Go ahead, Marc. I was just going to say, I think you've hit it right on the nose. I think it's really about fostering a very collaborative atmosphere and work environment, and Indeed. Positioning what you're doing as reinforcing each other's efforts, and not maybe stepping on their toes. So how your ability to influence and position what you're doing in terms of business value for everyone, and encouraging the fact that you're all in this initiative together is really key.
Yeah, I completely agree. Okay.
Yes, wonderful. Mark, do you want to go
final question.
Yes, do you want to go back to your last screen so that your contact information is there, although I think most people had time to take that down. And on behalf of IASA Canada, we will be sharing, yes, that one, thank you. We will be sharing this information with those who have attended the webinar today. So I will be sending the slide deck to you. And I would personally like to thank both Marc and Brenda for their time and their input. And I hope if there's any questions or concerns, please definitely give myself or Marc or Brenda a quick email, and we'll try to resolve that for you. Thank you again, everyone.
It's been our pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and thanks, Julie, for hosting us. We appreciate it.
Thanks again. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.